Let me guess. Kelly Phipps?
Kelly Lee Phippe.
Kelly
And
Kim Mannine. Oh,
Kim Mannine.
And Kim.
Gary Caton.
Gary Caton. This is our Astrology Illuminated TV crew. And of course we'll have Christina Brazenwood, my lovely wife, doing little intros for each segment. So we're dressing up in weird costumes and stuff. So we're going to make it fun.
Listen, we don't want your nightlife coming into our day show.
Here we are out here in the wonderful warmth of winter time at the fire pit. And the ancient storytellers used to tell stories around the fire, right, Gary?
That's right. And, you know, that's what we are at our essence, right? We're storytellers. We tell the story of the stars. Mm-hmm. And you know, we translate that into, like, you know, an allegory for life. Mm. And you know, what's really interesting about that is that people think that, you know, astrology requires belief, but really it's not. You know, it's not about belief. It's just about, it's a language, right? And it's a language of life.
Yeah, I always tell people I don't believe in astrology. And they're like, "What? You're an astrologer?" I say, "I just speak astrology.
Exactly.
I don't have to be believe in music. I have to be play music, you know."
Right.
And when I'm looking at these charts, I'm seeing cosmic rhythms and I'm playing the music. You know?
Yeah. And then it's the same in the same fashion. You don't need to believe a story that someone's telling you across the fire to see the humanness and the allegories. And the way Jesus spoke was in allegories,
parables,
right? And you didn't need to believe the story. You just needed to see the parable, see the allegory, and understand that he was talking about real human issues. And
it's like the Native Americans in their tradition. They would always go to an elder if they had problems in their life, and the elder would say, "I don't know anything about that, but seeing how you're sitting here, I'll tell you a story." And the story would contain all the wisdom the kid needed, and he'd be like, "Oh."
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
And what's beautiful about that is, by doing that, what the elder has done is they've removed themselves from this godlike position of knowing the truth.
Yeah.
And they've told the kid the story, and they've given them back their free will, which they were trying to put off on the teacher.
Yeah.
And they've said, "Look, kid, here's the story. Now you got to figure out what to do." And that's what we do as astrologers. People think we divine the future and we know people's destinies and stuff, and when people ask me to tell them their destiny, quite often my answer is, well, I think your destiny is that you will have to make some choices.
You're destined to make some choices.
We can help you with the energy surrounding what's about to surround, right?
Yeah.
So how do you work with storytelling in your chart work, Kim?
Oh, it just comes to me. You know, it's just amazing because it could be a few different things. It's not always exact. Like people say, well, what does that mean? But I think it's also kind of in a way being channeled by looking at it and just knowing what the right area is, don't you? I mean, I just find that it just, you can see the story, you can see their game board, what they're here to play and what they're here to do, and then it's up to them, really.
And when you're preparing for a session, you can see pretty much what the big issues are
yeah.
before they even walk in the door.
Oh, sometimes I can pick up and go, "Oh my gosh, did you just fall in love, meet someone at an airport, and just, are you leaving the country?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I go, "Where did that come from? That's not always that Pluto transit to like the egg." I'm serious. That's what it's like.
That's the divine nature of the intuition.
Right.
You know? That's when you're channeling something that's bigger than you, bigger than astrology even.
Yeah, because I always say that astrology is 1/3 knowledge. You got to know the
Right.
symbols and how they mix and all the different parts of astrology. But then there's this other part that's imagination, and that's when you go from being an amateur astrologer professional, in that you know how to bring it all together and synthesize it with vision and parables and stories and poetry. But then there's a third part, which is that divine intuition. The higher self says, and you get this idea, and you speak. You just have the courage to speak it to the client, and they're like,
I know, that's what happens.
Yeah.
That's when you become the oracle, right? Yeah.
Totally. And that's what I think all three of us have a practice that's oracular, in the sense that we're open to the guidance from the celestial, from the cosmic, from the within, from God, from whatever you want to call it. But we're also working with the symbols too, and keeping astrology as the lens and the focus.
Right. We need. I think the chart really just helps us use that. It's another tool to open up.
And that whole concept of that the stars speak, you know, that's really incredibly ancient, right? The oldest star map known is a fossil that's been dug up recently, and it was a piece of mammoth tusk. It's 32,000 years old.
Nice.
And
We've been looking at the stars for a long time.
Yeah,
and we've
been doing this for as long as we've been
join on board, hop
humans,
on board.
you know.
Yeah.
And carved into this piece of mammoth tusk was the constellation Orion, one of the most recognizable constellations, and it's a human figure. And interestingly enough, 32,000 years ago, people that we think of as primitive, grunting cave dwellers were sophisticated enough to notch in the side of this piece of mammoth tusk the exact number of days that Orion is visible in the sky, and to deduce that if you subtract that number of days from the 360-day solar cycle, that what you get is the basic length of the human gestational cycle. So 32,000 years ago, by watching the stars, people had a primitive form of a pregnancy calendar. Okay, and that's the kind of seeking and understanding, intuitive knowing, by allowing the stars to speak to us. That's hardwired into our brains.
Yeah.
It's hardwired into our brains because we evolved as hunters. Right?
Yeah.
Our eyes are in the front of our heads. We learned to track animals as we became Homo sapiens. We learned to track animals after we came down out of the jungle as Australopithecus and onto the wide open savanna. We learned to manipulate tools and dig up roots with sticks and stuff, and then we learned to manipulate fire as Homo habilis and Homo erectus, and then we learned to hunt. And ever since then, we've been hunting in one form or another. We hunted game, literally tracked the game. Then we learned to track the celestial omens, in the sky as agriculturalists to time the planting of the
create the
crops.
calendar.
Yeah, the solar calendar was invented by the Egyptians through the heliacal rising of Sirius, one of the brightest stars in the sky. And then we learned to track celestial omens for the king, right? For the king and the kingdom. And then,
like, oh no, Jupiter, when it was in this position last time, a ship crashed into the seaside. They started writing all these things down on omens, and they watch what happens in the sky, and then they put that on the tablets. And then when it happened again, they'd say, let's go back to the tablets, and they would try to deduce.
And that's
Is that how they began cycles? Is that how they started figuring out?
They knew way back when in Babylonian times. They observed all the heliacal risings of all the stars. And they had it all figured out. The Mayans had an extremely accurate calendar, which was so accurate they could build temples and orient them in just such a way that their architecture reflected their Quetzalcoatl, the serpent god, so that the shadow on the edge of the pyramid would form a serpent-type figure. I mean, they became incredibly adept at using these patterns.
And then when you look at Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth, they all had there's a sort of congruence within the mythologies of all these different cultures, and they all talk about the one in some way or another, the divine.
Yes.
And how the divine sort of gives birth to the universe through a creative process of becoming really two. This yang and this yin, or this day force and this night force.
The day force and the night force.
And I think that rhythm between the shadow and the light is what we're playing with in astrology, with the cycles, right?
Yeah, I mean, that rhythm that I was talking about, the Mayans understood so succinctly, even in their architecture, right? That rhythm underlies all the fundamental cycles of astrology. Here we are, and it's January, and the leaves are off the trees, and it's quiet, and it's the quiet, dark time of the year. The solar force is at its darkest.
Besides that dog barking over there, it's pretty quiet out here.
And the white squirrels.
And the white squirrels scurrying back and forth.
Yeah, we have white squirrels out here.
I've seen one for the first time. It's real.
Yeah, you don't believe them until you come
here. I've
here.
only seen statues of them.
I've had people get out of the car and literally see a white squirrel and go, did I just see a white squirrel?
What did you do to that guy? It's petrified.
I said, are you seeing pink elephants and white squirrels? And they're like, no, it was a white squirrel right over there.
Only at Kelly's house.
Yeah, only here do you see the white squirrels.
Supposedly they came from some kind of gypsy caravan, circus caravan or something. I don't know.
Yeah, they brought some up from Alabama or somewhere. And
Florida.
Put two of them here.
Way down
they
south.
mated, and now you got them everywhere. Now they have white squirrel contests.
That's our animal medicine for this whole show starting, because
the
that's the first thing we saw.
Maybe one will walk by. You never know. My cat, I got a big black fluffy cat named Paulo, and he's always out here looking at him. And I'm always like, what, are you jealous? You want a white coat? He's got a little white right here. He's like, why can't I be all white?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the medicine of an animal. In Native American thought, they quite literally you know, they had an animistic view of the world, that everything was alive, even the rocks. And the fire, of course, has a life in the squirrels, and they would observe the characteristics of an animal, and from that they would take lessons. And squirrel is about gathering. You know, they gather up the nuts, and they hoard them all in one little place. So it's interesting. You know, that's pretty much in line with the vision that Kelly has for this show and for this medium of.
Let's gather the wisdom of astrology and bring it to you.
There you go, and that's why we started off seeing a white squirrel.
I was
because
working
it's
out
not
this
your
morning.
average gathering.
Yeah.
It's not your everyday gathering.
Exactly.
Totally.
It's the divine,
Right, and it was white. It
mythic
really,
white squirrel.
it's perfect.
Totally.
We are channeling here today.
Yeah. And in terms of the unity archetype, I've been writing a lot of stuff about unity, and I really want to make it practical for people. Like, what does it mean if there is a principle of unified being, that at some level everything is one? Like, what results can we get out of that? And one of the results I came up with, which you might find interesting, we could talk about or not, in leading up to the sort of yin-yang theme of the story here, is that, let me see here, awakening. The first principle I wrote is beings can awaken to a vibrant relationship with eternal being, the source of life, generation, motion, and change. That's what we're talking about, the motion and the change. That would be, to me, the first principle of, like, a practical result of that there's a unity consciousness that you can tap into. You know, it's hard to live it in a dualistic realm, like you said before.
Yeah.
What were you saying about that?
Well, I mean, you know, the unity consciousness is not necessarily real in the sense of, you know, we live all our lives kind of trapped in a dualistic framework, you know. Unless
you're down to your last dollar, then you got $1.
Four quarters.
But you know, the idea of the unity is like this. It's like this this sort of divine archetype, you know, and if you want to think of it as God or the Great
Allah,
Spirit
Tao.
or whatever, but it's this
The one.
It's this sort of unapproachable essence that we know is there intuitively.
Oh yeah.
But you know, it's like we never quite reach it. However, we can channel some of it in terms of if we really understand duality, if we really understand where we are in the cycle of light and dark, and we embody that and we embrace it, then we make room. Instead of fighting the duality, we make room for that unity consciousness to come in, and
that's when the higher self descends, and you're more guided in life, as opposed to just kicking along.
The
random.
higher self that can view things from a holistic perspective, right? From a unity perspective.
Or maybe we call it the visionary self.
The visionary self, kind of the solar self.
Because I don't like to think of myself in its ordinary sense as a lower self, as opposed to the higher self.
Yeah,
You know? But the visionary self can descend and inform this vehicle that we're running around in, paying the bills, shopping, picking up the
Getting
kids
too
from school.
busy. Not right.
Yeah.
And we use our brain thinking too much. We use our mind too much.
Yeah. The other thing I came up with is that there's a creative void out there. And the creative void, I say, unified being gives rise to the creative void, the dimension of eternity that contains and connects all dimensions of space-time and all states of being, like an invisible web of unfailing nourishment and infinite fertility. And so that creative void, all the cultures talk about this void.
Absolutely.
I mean, even the Bible, it's like the universe is created from the void, or even in the East they call the void the pure affirmation of life.
The Native Americans were big on the void. You know, they believed very strongly that you shouldn't punish children too harshly because they were fresh from the void. This was the creative place where people, where spirits come from and are incarnated, and then if you punish the children too harshly, you might send them back to the void, right? And then when the Native Americans buried their dead, they would bury them in the fetal position. So they were going back. They were going back into the void. They were returning to the void, and so that concept absolutely permeates. It's one of the monomyths, is what Campbell would call it.
I don't know about you two, but in my astrology, I think I've touched that void. Because sometimes in the reading, I don't know if it happens 10 minutes in or 25, but at some point, there's just this emptiness that's full, that's feeding you, it's nourishing you.
Oh, yeah.
It's nourishing you with insights, it's nourishing you with archetypal wisdom, and it's nourishing the client, because they're obviously, you know, coming to get some kind of guidance or help or whatnot, and they leave pretty fulfilled most of the time.
I know, and I feel that way after they leave too. It's amazing.
Yeah,
It just feels so
don't you ever
good.
feel like running around the house and jumping up and down
on
and
a
be
trampoline?
Yeah. It's like, woohoo! We got a trampoline back there. We're about to try it later.
Mars and Taurus isn't ready for it
Yeah,
yet,
Gary
so
doesn't want to
we're
try a
gonna
trampoline.
I'm not doing.
He said he'll climb a tree.
I'll climb a tree. That's about as close as I get to trampoline jumping. But to go back to the idea of nourishment, what archetype do we relate that to in astrology?
The moon.
The moon, and also
Ceres.
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 And what's really interesting to me is that recently that Ceres archetype has been rebirthed in the sense of when the reclassification of the solar system by the astronomers, they basically put Ceres on par with Pluto, saying that they're both dwarf planets. But that whole idea of nourishment, and Ceres sits in the void between Mars and Jupiter, where Bode's law told us a planet should be, and we looked and looked and looked and could not find it. And then even after we found it,
we rejected it.
We rejected it and said, it's not really a planet, and now we're just
we don't want the goddess back up in here.
Yeah, not ready for it yet.
We're just not coming back now. Well, in 2006, I guess, there was the reclassification, and I believe that really speaks to an archetype and of the nourishment from the void, like you were talking about, that's emerging. And all three of us are interested in that archetype and exploring it. And I think that's kind of like the new frontier in astrology.
Yeah. And Demeter often, she taught the Eleusinian mysteries of how to go back into that void.
Absolutely.
And so we'll be breaking that down.
We will be breaking that down.
It's really fascinating because if you just, maybe it's just me or people in this world, but even before I started astrology, I decorated the whole room in the astrological symbols. Now I move here and I've never had a license plate that was a separate signature one, and I put Ceres on my license plate.
Really?
Now.
You have Ceres on your license plate?
Yeah, now. But isn't that strange? And here we are, and this is in the middle of, they're about to write a book on Ceres. It's sitting on my moon now, and it's like, this is a coincidence.
Wow, your moon's in Taurus?
Yeah.
Okay, so
9.
Ceres.
Yeah.
But it's just...
What do you have in Taurus? Mars?
So the void, the one, is sending Ceres through us,
yeah.
through our physical, mental, emotional vehicles to be expressed and to be reborn.
Yeah.
She's been reborn by the scientists, and now for once, the astrologers have to catch up with the scientists, right?
And it's funny because since 1994, I've had visions of Ceres, and I wrote about her extensively in my first book. And I just always felt that I could not do the whole chart without her in it. Something was missing. And when I put her in it, I felt archetypally whole. I had Chiron for my 11th planet and Ceres for my 12th. And I felt whole having the 12 and then the nodes. And it was just really beautiful to always have her in there. And use images like abundance, and use like sort of Venus and Taurus imagery, like groundedness and self-worth and self-esteem and psychological, security and just all those beautiful themes that we all want. Authentic sense of worthiness on the planet. What am I doing here? What's my value?
And that's because we are organic beings, right? I mean, we're organic beings, and we exist in an organic world that unfolds in organic processes, of light and dark. And Ceres is the goddess of Mother Nature. She is that organic process. She's the bringer of seasons. And I feel like I feel like people are hungry for that sort of thing in an extremely technological world that has alienated us to a large degree from our roots, from sitting around the fire and telling stories, and from being out and gazing at the stars, and from understanding the earth as being alive and being our source of vitality. So I think it's beautiful that archetype's being rebirthed right now, and I'm all about it.
Totally. I think one of the third principles of unity is holarchy. Dane Rudar talked about this, that the universe isn't about dimensions layered in levels of command, where one level commands the other below in the hierarchy. It's a holarchy. Dimensions in life is leveled in terms of wholes containing each other, and that the biggest whole isn't the greatest one, because it depends on all the holes. The most infinitesimal whole is just as important as the largest whole of the universe, And when we can grasp that, we can see the power of the atom, for instance.
Yes.
But you can access the power of atom on a spiritual level. You don't need a atomic accelerator breaking it up. You can actually feel it right here,
And when we can grasp that, we can understand that the disappearance of any species because of our ignorance and our greed is affecting the greater whole, and we can start to adjust our way of thinking and living in a more sustainable fashion.
The other thing is the synchronicity of being. When you have a sense of connection and unity, the synchronicity of being is there. You can always tell when you run into someone at the coffee shop that you need to talk to them. When there's that look in the eye. And that's unity operative in the physical plane.
Absolutely.
Unity saying, you guys need to get together and have a talk,
Yeah.
And it's those moments where if you stay open to that, here's what I wrote it, but due to the interconnected nature of existence through holarchy, there's an instantaneous communication between all wholes throughout space and time. This correlation is not a causal relationship and does not diminish with distance. This conversation happens intuitively and is spontaneous and unpredictable in its way of manifestation. The ability to ascertain the flow of meaning is a discipline to be cultivated and requires a sort of an attitude of spontaneity or spontaneous being. I think unity gives us that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you're in the flow, when you're experiencing those coincidences, and Redfield had that whole book about the insights back in the 90s and everything. But when you're experiencing that flow, that's a really good clue that you're channeling some unity consciousness and that needs to that you need to pay attention to the divine guidance that you're receiving in your life at that time.
I think once you open up to it, it's there all around you, morning, noon, and night.
I was going to say, the attitude of the Magi, the astrologer, the awakened one, is that you expect it to be there.
Right.
A great astrologer, Antaro Ali, said, in one of his books, he said, in the past they called it coincidence.
Oh, right.
But now they call it synchronicity. He said in the future they're going to call it a discipline to be cultivated.
That is so perfect.
Nice.
Yeah. Because it is. If you wake up today and say, I'm going downtown, I'm going to meet some amazing people, and just have that attitude of like, what is the universe going to bless this personage with today, and then boom, there it is, you're going to run into something cool with that attitude, right?
Yeah, and then oftentimes that's the greatest gift we can give clients as astrologers is to say, everything is as it should be. Your chart contains these archetypes, and it's no wonder that this is going on. It's no surprise. I would be surprised if you weren't confused. I would be surprised if you weren't having a crisis
or depressed
in this
Saturn's
area
on the moon
or whatever. And so to give them permission to be in that space and to understand that everything is as it should be.
I find we just validate things they already know.
Exactly.
Really. It's just validation of what you're going through and not feeling like you're crazy or depressed for a reason, and giving them an idea of when it's going to end, that feeling.
Exactly.
But to really
This too shall
work
pass.
it while it's happening.
Yeah, that's the greatest gift I think we give.
Yeah,
as
I like that
astrologers.
last thing she said. Work with it while it's happening. Not just,
Ignore
when's
it
this
and
going to
take
be over?
medication, right.
Please tell me,
Yeah.
astrologer, when will this phase end? I hate my life right now. It's like,
Right, or I need to medicate till I get past this Saturn moon.
Yeah. I always
It's
say,
like, no.
if Saturn's on your
How
moon,
long
I'm supposed to feel it.
Yeah.
How long do I stock the liquor cabinet for?
No, I always say, Saturn's squaring your moon right now, and you're depressed, and you need to be. You need to be in a state of melancholia, what the ancients would call melancholia, going down into the grief to explore it, to work through it, not to take Prozac so you don't have to go down there at all, and never grow as a human being.
Right.
Because it'll come back again. You may as well get it the first time.
Like Yates said, for nothing can be whole or sold that has not been rent.
Absolutely.
Well, it's even the Uranian transit at midlife. It's how many people run out there and have affairs because they have this energy going on. It's not about that.
Right
It's
around
about
39 to 42.
They have to blame the person they're with a lot of times.
There's a whole
Revolution.
developmental barrage that happens at midlife where you start out, in our generation, you start out with Pluto square Pluto, which is huge. I mean, Pluto square Pluto is about rebirthing parts of ourselves that have been cut off because of societal conditioning and people telling us no, and you should do this and you should do that, and it's about reclaiming those parts, authentic parts of ourselves. And then you go into the Neptune square where you it's kind of like, well, why did this happen to me? Why were these parts of me cut off? And it's kind of, there's a grieving element to Neptune as well. And then you go into the Saturn opposition, which is a whole nother ball game about being disciplined and being accepting and understanding and taking responsibility for this whole process rather than being a victim, Neptune. And then you go into the Uranus opposition. So there's this huge developmental barrage, and the Uranus opposition, if you start out at the conjunction, the Uranus opposition is like the full moon of Uranus. It's the flowering of
the full
a,
revolution is on.
It's the flowering of
at
a human
42.
being.
Motorcycle ridden for 6 months
Exactly.
to midlife crisis.
I never did that before. I must.
I know. Well, see, the mistake people make at 42 is they try to go back and be 21.
Right.
So they remember the first Uranian square, and they're like,
Yeah.
what happened to my life when I was young?
Right.
I want to be.
Instead of realizing where they're heading
Right.
with that Saturn opposition that comes at 44.
You have to do it in a Saturn.
Well, they
fashion.
blame the person they're with for the boredom they're feeling,
Yeah.
or they need excitement. They're feeling Uranus, and they're going, "Well, I'm bored now because of this." It's not the person next to you.
Well, here's
all
here's
here.
a new thought about that. I thought about the archetypal human lifespan of 84 years. You know, you look at, like Carl Jung wrote Memories, Dreams, and Reflections at 84. And it's such an amazing autobiography of his life. And when I always like to read books of people that lasted 84 years.
Fantastic quotes from
I
that
know
book.
quite a few people at 84 that, whoa, they get a whole new life.
They start a whole new life.
Right.
It's the
So
Uranus
it's
return.
either goodbye or
But here's the thing. If you think about it, you take that 84 years and you divide it into phases of 7. There's a lot of 7 phases. Uranus through signs, Saturn's quarter, progressed moon's quarter. So you take that and you say, okay, you got 12 7-year cycles. You know, the first one, the Saturn return, all the way to the Saturn return would just be like the Aries, the Taurus, the Gemini, and the Cancer. You know, the last one would be the Pisces. So a lot of people die in their late 70s before they get to 84 because they get into that last 7-year phase and they're like, time to dissolve.
The
right?
balsamic.
Oh, right.
Yeah. But if you think about the midlife, right, you have, you know, after the first 4, you go into the Leo phase, right after the Saturn return, for 7 years. And then when in that midlife crisis phase, you're in the Virgo phase. So you said people get bored, they start analyzing their life, they're like, what happened to the last 7 years? It was fun, playful, Leo, I was in my prime. And so they get in that Virgo phase and they start analyzing and going, I don't like my
What's
life.
wrong?
What is wrong?
The question that Virgo asks is, what's wrong? What needs adjustment here?
Exactly.
What's wrong with this
Yeah,
picture?
so that's a new thought I had about that.
Yeah,
the
I never thought of that.
The 7-year phases have. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you know, I think as astrologers, being in touch with that is absolutely crucial. That a human lifetime is a developmental process from beginning to end. And astrology breaks that down in so many ways. It's an organic process. It's an organic language for an organic process, which is life. And that's why it's a language of life, because the two agree. The two are talking about the same principles. And that's why it works. That's why it's so beautiful, because you can talk to people about real organic processes that reflect the real organic processes of their life. The planets are doing this, and your life is doing this, and as above, so below.
As above, so below.
It's
Yep.
all
No,
it's
I
all
think
there.
the people that suffer the most, that aren't willing to change or want things the way they were, that's when you really have a hard time with it.
So one other principle that came up here was that I was thinking about unity. What else can we get practical that there is unity in the universe? And one I thought of was creative communion. But the relationship between wholes is more vital than their isolated identities in space-time. This realization inspires us to treat our interconnectedness sacred and real through the cultivation of intuition, a spiritual practice, through our bliss centered in love. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven within, right? The ability to commune with the eternal being and share insights with others, like we're doing here, is life in full expression. This mitosis of being defines the 1-2 pattern, because we're 1-2ing it all day long. You know, we're flowing.
Saw Father.
Yeah. And in reconciliation, unified being has the amazing quality of being able to bear, contain, and reconcile opposites. This is the divine compassion that heals wounds and forgives. When we stop focusing on what other people in life has done to us and start realizing the miraculous interplay of eternal being, what divinity has done for us, the magic grows and the mystery flows. You got a problem? Take it to eternal being for resolution. You know?
Yeah.
And that in astrology is what we see in the opposition a lot of times.
Yes.
The reconciliation of opposites.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, Tarnas talks about that tension of opposites, that if you can hold that, if you can hold that tension. And what's really funny about that in terms of the opposition is I think that's a really good distinction between the square and the opposition, because the square kind of forces a choice. You know, Roger calls the opening square when you go from the conjunction and you move to the opening square, or first quarter moon, or
crisis.
crisis in action.
Yeah.
There's a choice. There's an action that needs to be done, right? And then
I like the Greek word crisis means to decide.
To decide, right?
To make a decision.
Squares force decisions.
Yeah.
Oppositions there's this tension of opposites, and it's like there's not an easy choice necessarily. You have to bring the opposites and integrate them in a way that you have to sit with that tension a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
With the square, you can act and you can kind of, get it off your back to some degree. But with the opposition, you have to hold that tension. And so it brings about anxiety, it brings about, and psychologically, if you study psychological theory, all of the really cool psychologists realize that anxiety is not a symptom to be, medicated. It's an opportunity for growth. We don't grow unless we're broken down to some level.
Imagine an athlete before a football game. You feel all that anxiety.
But
it's an opportunity to get out there and play and grow.
To burst forth and grow and to manifest.
Right.
And just like the vegetative cycle, we see, right now the leaves are all around us and the matter has been broken down. It's been broken down and fallen apart so that it can be, and like in the Tao, it talks about to be full, first you have to be emptied. And so there's
the cup finds its usefulness through the emptiness. The window's useful because it's empty.
Exactly.
How can you empty your cup?
Is that a Pluto transit also?
Yeah, it's a Pluto transit. Yeah. Well, no, what are you talking about? I had Pluto oppose my moon in Gemini in my 7th house, and during that time I got involved with a younger woman, Gemini, who was a writer. She had a Pisces moon. She was a mythologist, and she was writing a novel about the Eros and Psyche myth.
Nice.
And we got in this intense relationship where, like, it was so passionate and so deep and so amazing.
So she was holding that energy for you to some extent until you could. And
then when the relationship ended, it was very tragic. It was very, like, hard to let go. It was like one of the hardest relationships I ever let go of. But in the letting go, and I wrote this poem called Inches from Change in tears one night at 3 in the morning, and just it was my release poem, and now it's in me.
Right.
And now it's in me, that memory. Now that I'm remarried, and I take all that experience into the next one, and it's so beautiful, because I've integrated. Before, I didn't have it. I needed her to come in and be, and I was probably doing something for her too.
The opposition is
flowing,
there's projection inherent within self-other.
And that's what happened in your natal chart when you have an opposition. You might project one half and own one half, and you have to meet other people that play this until you
Moon
get
Neptune opposition.
You have Moon Neptune opposition? How have you experienced that in your life?
Oh,
Don't want to say it on camera here.
Well, it could be vampire, needy, blood-sucking people until I got into the spiritual world, and now I understand the whole thing about it. But it is true, and Neptune comes out of nowhere. Oh yeah.
Yeah, the victim savior is with the Neptune. Right. But also the escapism is so strong, the need for that escape, that you'll do it through dark avenues until you find some enlightenment, and then it's on.
Then it's great. Then it's worth it.
And then when you realize that the escape from dualism is in embracing it. By embracing it, you channel the one, and so that's the real escape. That's the vibrant escape that's enlivening. That's full of life, and not full of darkness and decay
and despair.
But it would be great if everybody could see relationships that way when they are over, that it is going to be okay.
Yeah, it is
that
okay.
you will grow, and there's a reason this space is being created.
Exactly.
And it was a chosen time, kind of, in a way, to have this person come into your life.
Yeah, totally. I mean, when Pluto crossed my sun and opposed my moon, we met. It was so intense. And then when it retrograded, we moved in together. 9 months later, it crossed for the final third pass. We broke up, and it was over.
Right.
And it was like so intense. It was like being with someone for 40 years, but in the space of like one intense year and a half.
That sounds like
Pluto.
Sounds like Pluto. Yeah.
Well, Pluto hit my 7th house.
Oh, yeah,
and, I was married for 15 years, together for 20 years. But it's interesting that's like, why then? Why at this time does it happen? The garbage disposal, because we weren't growing together. I mean, I'm just saying, it's about transforming your relationship, and if it doesn't transform,
then it dies.
So why then, right? It's
Well, the last thing I like to think about, the 7th principle of unity, is consciousness. I put unity as the primal archetype, the original governing image, the archetype. This primal archetype is the first spark of eternal consciousness, of eternal being, realizing, like, I amness, right? The Om, right? If pronounced together as a mantra, This vibration streams through the universe and means we, as fractals of eternal consciousness, are all connected through the unified field. This inspires a way of harmonic action in the web of life. What I do or say to you, I do and say to eternal being, which oscillates back to me. In Zen, they call this state of consciousness beginner's mind. The division of eternal being into creative awareness, yang, and source wisdom, yin, it's sort of the first opposition that gave birth to the universe and consciousness as the principle of rhythmic vibration. And that first stage of this rhythmic vibration is its unfolding essence. The word consciousness literally means to know with. Conscious, yeah. It doesn't say who to know with, but it's easy to figure it out.
So we invented a new archetype here, I think, the Siamese twins.
The Siamese twins.
3 people joined at the hip.
Yeah. The Siamese twins.
Now, if you're wondering about Kelly's Siamese outfit for the day, he's a little torn between black tie
and
or
shorts.
jogging.
Yeah. I don't know if I want to go jogging, I wanted to be serious about
I think this is serious. This is like, the winter and then coming out in the spring. My daughter's coming back!
Yeah. Well, what I thought of today is, like, I really want to take my astrology serious.
My pants have been abducted.
My pants have been abducted.
My pants have been abducted.
It wasn't his fault.
No, I want to take my astrology serious, but I can never be not zany, I'm a moon in Gemini. I'm a court jester trickster.
Well, that Sagittarian aspect coming through too, right? The lower self, hairy animal.
Oh, let's face it, his wife didn't do the laundry yet. Let's get right to the
basics. She was doing the laundry when they got here.
Are your pants dry yet, hon?
So, what's happening now in terms of the yin-yang polarity in astrology? I mean, polarity is the essence of it all, right?
Yeah, if you look around and you realize that in the tropical zodiac, that all the cycles of astrology are based on the polarity of darkness versus light. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's mid-morning and the sun is climbing towards its zenith at noon, and that's the most light part of the day. Mm-hmm. And then it'll descend, and darkness will overcome light at dusk. Mm-hmm. And then it will go down and be directly below us at the nadir at the darkest time of the day, midnight. Mm-hmm. And then it'll rise again in the east, and light will overcome darkness. Mm-hmm. And that same cycle can be seen in the monthly cycle. During, at the first quarter moon, light overcomes darkness, and then the full moon is the height of the cycle, and third quarter is darkness overcoming light, and down to the new moon. And the same cycle can also be seen in the yearly cycle of the sun, where we're at now at the dark time of year, the solstice and the equinox, and the next solstice and the equinox. So this primal alternation of darkness and light underlies all 3 of the main cycles of astrology, and that's why we can say secondary progressions, for instance, a day equals a year, because it's the same cycle.
Yeah, it's archetypally, symbolically
equal. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So a day does equal a year, and it works. Anybody who's done progressions, that's some pretty profound stuff.
Yeah, and a progression is, if you don't know, is like when you're born, the planets are in a certain alignment, and that's your birth chart. But nothing is static. Everything keeps moving. And when you're a baby laying there in your crib, you're being impinged upon by cosmic forces going, whoa! Baby's looking around going, seeing ghosts, And the thing is that sun, when it moves 1 degree the next day, that first day's movement of planetary energy, the moon moves 13 degrees, symbolizes something about your first year, the symbolic unfolding of your seed potential. So you can go look at, like, let's say you're 28 or 48. You can go look and turn the planets 48 days after you're born, and that day, the chart at that moment is like a glimpse of your 48th year, of your psychological unfolding of the seed, like an acorn turning into an oak tree or whatever,
Oh, I just turned 48 yesterday.
Hey, I didn't even know that. Wow.
That's the one.
No, not yesterday, Monday.
It's the one.
It's the one.
So, am I the experiment?
Yeah, you're the experiment. But also you see the cyclic flow in the signs, because let's say Aries, for instance, is the sign of the warrior, the hero archetype, the pioneer. It doesn't find its wholeness until it can learn how to be its opposite, Libra. The diplomat, the negotiator, the peacemaker.
It's really one archetype.
It's one archetype, yeah. So really in astrology we don't have 12 signs. We have 6 signs, but they're divided by 2, so we have 12 expressions of energy. That there's really just 6 flows going on here. And I guess Aries Taurus would be I always call it the sign of the archetype of the martial Aries artist. Because when you can...
There's Libra.
Yeah, the artist, Libra.
Yeah.
Because when you learn martial arts, you have that action backed with grace. The first thing you learn in martial arts is that if you throw a punch, you've already lost the battle. Because you're not a peaceful warrior.
Is that the step back 1, 2?
That's the 1, 2, yeah.
See, I caught on to that first step.
Yeah. You don't need to.
I had to do a few lessons before I was allowed to sit here.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I had to prove my Martian.
Yeah, because well, even in martial arts they teach that principle of the yin and the yang. 1, 2. Everything's 1, 2, 1, 2. My sensei used to tell me when I was a young martial artist, he goes, "First thing we're going to teach you is how to count to 2." And I laughed at him. I was like, "What are you talking about? This guy's 65 years old. And he was stirring a pot of like
he was talking about the cyclical one too,
Yeah.
not the linear one.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a big difference.
Yeah, he was talking about the cyclical.
Yeah.
He was stirring his pot, right? And I was this young high school stud athlete, you know, and I came up in there thinking I was going to learn some martial arts, right? And then he stopped stirring for a moment, and he flew at me and hit me 9 times in 9 different pressure points, made my whole body just light up with light, and then went back to stirring the pot. He goes, I think I can teach you a thing or two. This guy spoke 5 languages.
That sounds like straight out of science fiction, bro.
Yeah, dude, this was my Mr. Miyagi growing up. You know, we just called him Sensei. He wore a little Chinese vest and it said Sensei on the It was so cool, you know.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah, so it was good to have teachers like that growing up. But in astrology, you can see when those teachers come along, you know, at different points. You know, like just yesterday, I signed my kid up for martial arts, and I went down there and I met this guy named Travis again, and he's a martial artist, and I saw the glint in his eye, and I just knew, because I've been driving by that place, traditional martial arts school, blah blah blah, sign up now. And finally, I went in there and I met this guy, and I was just like, wow, you know, because sometimes it's hard to teach your own kids when you know.
Oh, right.
They need to find an aunt or an uncle or a sensei, a teacher that's not their blood relation, because they want to rebel against that crap.
Right, that's true. Even I send my kids out for astrology readings. I mean, I can do it, but they listen to other people.
Yeah, they don't want to listen to mom doing their astrology chart. You know, I tell my kid,
blah, blah,
and that's why one reason I haven't really pushed astrology on my kid. You know, I let him know it's there. I move his planets with him, but I don't really say much about it. And every once in a while he'll ask me a question. What's happening with my Saturn?
Yeah, you want it to be his choice if he decides to do it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And astrology is just a great language. Also, cyclic flow. We have it in terms of archetypal polarities, like Jupiter and Saturn. Or, you know, in a sense, you could also say Moon Saturn with the whole Cancer Capricorn theme. But I also get the whole...
There's all these archetypal polarities.
Sun,
right?
Moon.
Sun, Moon.
Venus,
Mars.
Yeah.
Jupiter, Saturn.
Right.
I even feel like Uranus, Neptune, sudden change, gradual change.
Yeah.
And then you have Mercury, Pluto are kind of the wild cards.
Yeah.
You know, but there's definitely something about that pairing.
It's interesting about Mercury Pluto because both their orbits are like real tilted, like 17 degrees to the
And Mercury was the only god that could go into the
to go down.
underworld.
Yeah.
So not only
And their
are
symbols look
their
similar.
symbols are the only ones to incorporate all 3 of the glyphs, right?
Yeah.
So that polarity, and so you know the way that we look at the Sun Moon cycle in terms of new moon, first quarter, full moon, third quarter. You can even look at it in an 8-fold sequence, but we can look at that the same way with all those archetypal planets. The Jupiter-Saturn cycle is notorious among political or mundane astrologers. Mundane meaning mundos, world, rather than like
It's
the
not
astrology
boring
of ants or something. But that's notorious amongst astrologers that you know that cycle sort of is the pulse of the socio-political climate. Right now we're in the trine. You know, Jupiter just entered Capricorn, Saturn just entered Virgo. So there's this really nice flow because it's the same element. And it's kind of a quiet time, but it's a deceptive quiet. Right? Well, it wasn't exactly quiet with Buto's assassination. That has to do, I think, with Pluto kind of being ready to
shift gears.
Well,
it's interesting because when Pluto was in the last degrees of Scorpio back in 1995, I thought, wow, the planet of death is in the last degrees of the sign of the death, and today is the last day. And on that day, the Egyptian guy was assassinated back in 95.
Right.
So,
and also, the last time that Pluto crossed into Sag and then retrograded back into Scorpio was the day of the Kobe earthquake. So when these planets move into a new archetype, there's
world shifts going on.
There's a sudden manifestation of the energy. It's kind of like what you were talking about when a planet hits one of your planets by transit. That first hit, there's like this wow, there's this
it's the call
introduction.
To adventure.
Yeah, exactly. And then when it retrogrades back across, there's this sort of deeper understanding of what is the meaning of this and what am I to learn. And then as it stops and goes back forward, then there's this kind of release, like you were talking about with your relationship.
And in storytelling, they call it the denouement, where Scooby-Doo takes off the mask of the villain, and everybody gets their reward for the journey, and the society gets the elixir that the hero brings back. It's that whole cycle. But what do you think with Pluto going into Capricorn is going to be interesting, because Pluto is going to go into Capricorn on January 26th. There's a lot of turmoil in this culture about the way we've been doing the whole war in Iraq.
Right.
And Pluto's going into Capricorn. Not to get political. Don't ever get political with Gary. His Aries might explode.
Uh-oh.
But it's
We
interesting.
don't have enough time to get political with Harry.
It's interesting that Pluto's going to go into Capricorn right before Super Tuesday.
Yes.
Something's going to shift in the politics.
Absolutely. And Mars stations direct at about that same time. So you know, with retrogrades, nothing is ever as it seems, right? Because
right now,
the way I look at a retrograde is it's similar to the dark phase.
Yeah.
The light, you have the light and the dark phase that we talked about, the waxing moon and the waning moon, and the light and the dark. The retrograde is the unconscious dark phase of that energy because the planet has been driven into the underworld, is the way I like to see it. And so nothing is ever as it seems, and here we go, you know, Hillary lost in Iowa, right, and people are saying, oh, Hillary's done, you know, Obama rocks, and
Obama!
And then
a week later.
And then a week later,
she had to cry first.
Wait a minute, I think I'll pull out that Pisces
Hillary
moon.
and McCain win, so now the race is all mixed up, nobody knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And there will absolutely be a shift when Mars goes direct and Pluto crosses into another sign.
Yeah, all bets are off.
Well, there'll be a big shift, and you know, 40% of the electoral votes or whatever in the primaries will be cast on that Super Tuesday. So we'll have a winner at that point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And as that shift planetary wise happens, and it's really, I mean, it's astounding that all happened because we've known. You could have looked back 100 years ago and said Pluto is going to cross into Capricorn on this date, right around this time.
Capricorn governs structures and governments and
all this stuff. And isn't it fascinating that there was this complex web of things that all these states decided to move their primaries up to that time, and then the parties had to they actually made it to where, you know, there were consequences if you moved them any earlier. So they moved. A lot of people moved them up. It had to be that day because if anybody else moved it earlier to compete, then they would have been consequenced. You know, Saturn, Capricorn, right?
Yeah.
So there's this whole archetype that's being birthed at that time, and it's just it's like the life here on Earth is catching up to the fact that we've known Pluto is going to be in.
It's interesting because Jupiter's entering Capricorn. Already has at Christmas. Pluto's going into Capricorn. Saturn and Virgo. We got a lot of Earth energy happening here. What would you say about
Earth. I have a grand trine in Earth, so I'm all for Earth.
Oh, you're going to have a great time during this time. You're flowering, huh?
Woo, watch out. Oh, and here I am.
Grand Earth trine.
But don't you find that, though? I do find that, like, Pluto and Caton, that day, that specific day, everything ended up being that day. So you wonder, is it part of the plan? Was the universe? Was it... Who worked that out that it turned out to be that day? Because when you go back to see when things happened and you don't look at charts like most people do, it's always exact in a
pretty
chart.
close.
The universe is always driving, you know?
I think the universe drove that. I mean, in a way.
There's a conspiracy of astrologers, you know,
That's
that actually run the world government. We've been doing this since the days of the Magi, who were the first conspirators, who all orchestrated the rise of Jesus and Christianity. And all that stuff.
No, it's not.
You know about all that, right?
No, that's the point of it being, as much as we like to plan things, and we can look back and it's all pretty much stated. Not as it's going to be, but...
Yeah, I like to work with the archetype creatively. I often journal my transits. Oh, Pluto's coming across my Venus. What are all the manifestations of that?
Right, exactly.
And then you're meditating the transit,
positive
and it flows.
For amateur astrologers, I think that is absolutely the most profound thing you can do.
Right.
If you can simply learn to follow your transits, to know when a planet that's moving in the heavens is impacting the static map of one moment in time,
when you were born,
space and time, your birth. If you can understand that process and you can journal along with it, you can find out what your Pluto is about, what your Mercury about, what your, you know, Kelly and I can sit here and give you sort of, and Kim, we can all, between the three of us, we can give you quite an a la carte menu to choose from to manifest that. But the ultimate informer, the ultimate guide is life.
Right.
And as you journal that process, you come to understand very deeply what your process, what's the organic process of individuation that you are here for, your purpose.
And that's what the focus of the show is to really give you the power. Say, look, we want to teach you how to be your own astrologer, And yes, there will always be a need for counselors and guides and astrologers and all that. But you can take your own power and say, look, I can creatively orchestrate my life in a way that you tap into that synchronicity of being, you know?
Right.
And then life is magical. Then there is enchantment in the universe.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. As soon as you believe it, it starts to happen.
Absolutely. And what's interesting when you say enchantment, we were talking about on the way up that, you know, the way I found astrology, as you well know, because you interviewed me and we talked about my dream.
Oh, and don't miss his interview. We're going to have it up this month too.
You know, I was on a spiritual quest, and specifically because I felt disenchanted, right? I wanted to find the magic in life again. You know, I was at that Uranus square of 21, and I wanted to experience life and the magic of life and the flow of the unity consciousness. And, you know, you talked about.
We wanted to bust out.
You know, and what I found eventually on a spiritual quest was astrology. So, you know,
Astrologos.
Astrologos. So, you know, for people who want to be really fundamentalist and say,
can I get an amen from the tree out there?
That astrology
Who's answering your
you
prayers,
know,
really?
So even though I might say astrology doesn't require belief, there is a magic to the use of the language, because it's a language that reflects life, and it reflects the magic of life. So, you know, there is a spiritual element to it, even though it doesn't require belief. It can be a spiritual path. I mean, I feel that to the depths of my bones, you know.
And if that tree falls in the forest over there, I think all three of us will hear it.
Well, it is when you're having a Pluto-Mars transit. I mean, it is good to work out and get that energy somewhere before you do want to kill somebody or have that
totally
in you. So
yeah, when Pluto's on your Mars,
that's what's anything, Uranus, Mars, whatever it is good to know ahead of time in a way so that you can help it a little bit.
Yeah, and if you're prepared, if you're, you know, if somebody gives you, you know, the heads up that tree's might, you know, that tree looks like it's leaning, you know, you know, Uranus is getting ready to hit your Mars and Taurus, right? You know, if there's any trees leaning,
it wouldn't be a good idea to head up that ice hill on a Uranus Mars transit.
You know,
stand under the
these
tree.
kind of things, you know, it's like if there's any trees near your house that are kind of leaning, you might want to get the chainsaw out, because chances are under that transit the wind's going to do the work for you.
There's an astrologer in Utah named Ann Windsor, and her slogan is, "Life's an adventure, be prepared."
Yeah. So, you know, in a way, I guess the astrologer is as a magi is kind of a Boy Scout, you know, in one sense, but in another sense, you know, it's almost like by envisioning the future and by envisioning the energies, you're birthing them at the same time. You know, it's that whole principle with the relativity theory and the scientists finally figuring out, as they were studying the minute particles of the atoms, that the mere act of observing the experiment influences the outcome.
Yeah, and it's like by you observing the transit, you're taking an experiential you know, step into it, to flow with it, to be sort of the weaver of a tapestry that you create.
Exactly.
And then there's always that level of, you know, let the universe bring in its magic. You don't want to predict exact futures. You want to see the array of possibilities, and then sort of blend it in a beautiful tapestry, and then flow with it, and then let the divine do its thing too, and be open to the surprise. I don't like to know what exactly is coming down the pipe. I'd rather just be open to the surprise. We can't do that.
Right.
Really, let's
and
admit.
It's manifesting it too, and like a new moon, like we decided to make a plan for a Capricorn new moon. Get an idea of what you think you want, so you can manifest it. And
we didn't know what we were going to do today. We just got together, set up the camera, and said, "Let's talk about astrology." And actually, let me check the camera real quick.
Oh no,
we can't afford a cameraman yet.
So we're not on tape or anything like that.
We're at 54, and this goes up to 64. We got 10 minutes.
We got 10 minutes.
10 minutes to tie it up.
Okay.
All right. This might just be the show right here, just for this time.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Right.
We got to get all crazy and break out green screens.
We're not ending on the trampoline.
Do we want to talk about
the final thought?
No.
We want to talk about Mars.
All right.
Because I've been thinking, I had some thoughts the other night. I was watching Heroes, and I was thinking about my heroic depths, I was really hungry, but I already ate an hour ago, and I was feeling kind of like, oh, my stomach hurts from what I ate. I had a bad reaction. And I was like, I'm really craving those potato chips with the pepper and salt. And I was like, ooh, peppery chips. And I was like, you know, every time you eat those, you get a stomach ache. You're already sitting on a stomach. What are you going to do, stack a stomach ache on top of a stomach ache? And I was like, but I just want them. And so finally I just forced myself to go in there and pour them into a big bowl, my popcorn bowl, and I ate the whole bag, you know. And I had a stomach ache. And I was like, damn. And the thought that came to me was, desire is more powerful than intelligence. And I was like, and that was what came to me, the inner teacher
Ain't
within.
that the truth?
And I thought, and I was like, I knew I should have ate that bag, and I did. So my desire was fueling, my Mars was fueling my moon, my need to eat something, and my Venus, my pleasure instinct, you know, my Mars got behind them and just kicked Mercury off to the side, said, my intelligence, boom, gave it the backhand. And I thought, well, how can we use Mars in the service so that we can pick up Mercury? The pen is mightier than the sword.
Right.
And what I realized was that it's the sun. The sun is the core of light within us that can give us purpose, and then that purpose can harness that Mars, like a king harnessing the night to go forth on that adventure and slay that dragon.
Yeah, well, in a really archetypal sense, the sun is about as close to unity consciousness as we can get, because the sun is the source of all the carbon.
With a dot.
And yeah, exactly,
It's
and
a
it's
target
the source
symbol.
of
We'll
all
shop at Target.
it's the source of all the carbon in our bodies. And the last gasp of a star, we literally are stardust, as the song by Joni Mitchell says.
Stardust.
In the last gasp of a star, it fuses heavier and heavier and heavier elements until, boom, it explodes and spews the seeds of life across the universe. You know. And if you look at
we might have been joined together, you know, as a molecule before.
in the night sky, you know, the moon is, as Tarnas talked about in Baltimore. You were there. He talked about the moon is the light that allows all the other lights to shine. So there's this broad, diverse array of lights. And when the sun comes up, there's one light in the sky, right? That is the guiding consciousness, the unity consciousness. And the sky is all one big blue, you know, sphere. So
Akhenaten's Amen.
So, you know, in that
Ra.
sense, the sun is like the king. You know, he's the king of our personal universe. And what we need to do when we were talking about this is to make the night, Mars, truly in service to the king. And so we need to, rather than just, you know, you were having a struggle between your logical unity consciousness and your Mars desire consciousness, and rather than pick one or the other, to put them in service of each other, and to give Mars a divine service. If he was in his divine service mode, he wouldn't be worried about it.
Well, today I'm in my desert. Today I'm in my desert. Today I got up and I just went right to the gym and worked out and sweat and just totally did Mars, because my Mars is in a fire sign, Sagittarius, but it's also in the spiritual sign. And when I took my kid to the martial arts class, it reminded me of being in martial arts class. Back when I was little and even into my 20s, and I was like, I need to get my training going on, you know what I mean? Wah! You know? And so I woke up today just totally inspired to work out, and now I'm all sore. But it's like, it's a whole different feeling than sitting on the couch with a bag of chips in you.
Right. No, it is. Exactly.
And I think in our charts, this is important, I think that aspects don't have to happen in the chart for you to analyze the relationship by archetype between Mars and, say, the Sun. Or even Mercury and the Moon, like what you think and what you feel. It's important to understand that relationship, no matter if there's a degree, angle, aspect. Mars and the Sun, like let's just use ourselves for example. I have the Sun in Aquarius that says, my purpose, my king wants to do humanitarian works, bring some visions to humanity. My Mars in Sagittarius, how do I do it? Teaching. Through 12th house, video, you know, visions, you know, poetry, you know.
Yeah, so even if they aren't technically in an angle, in an aspect, they're still speaking to each other.
Yeah, they're all, because within the plane of consciousness and the soul, psyche, the soul, you have all the archetypes resonating, you know.
Right.
So they're all there. And I think the personal planets, especially Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Moon, those five especially, they need to be analyzed in their relationship with each other, because if you have the Moon governing how you feel and Mars governing what you're going to do about it, how you feel and what you do. Some people have the square and it's really a conflict. Between what they do and what they feel.
We were talking about this on the way up. For half the ride, we were talking about Mars and Moon and how some traditional astrologers would say, like right now we have Mars in Gemini, and it just came out of Cancer. And you know, you heard a lot of astrologers saying, "Oh, Mars in Cancer is very bad because Mars is in his fall and he's fallen, and he doesn't agree with the energy of Cancer." And they might say the same thing about Mars Moon aspect. You know, that there's some conflicting, but you know, I feel like that we were talking about the Sun in terms of the logical, solar, you know, conscious aspect of the masculine, and Mars as the unconscious, instinctive element of the masculine. And I feel like it's maybe the same way with the feminine, that Venus, the heart center, is the conscious element of the feminine, and Moon is sort of that maternal, instinctive, caregiving, protective, nurturing force. And so when you're talking about Mars Moon aspects, you're talking about the instinctive male and the instinctive female. So you're really talking about very compatible energies. And what, you know,
I mean, Stephen King had Mars in Cancer,
right?
And he was a master of taking our phobias and our worries and put them in a Mars sort of horror flick, conflict, you know, but then making us realize things through the story, you know.
Exactly. And you know, when you look at his work, especially I like that book, The Stand. You know, it talks about this, and he, I mean,
in my hometown.
Yeah, and we're both very familiar with Boulder, but the whole thing about that book is he reinterprets this darkness versus light, you know, which, as we said, underlies all the natural cycles of astrology, and also is really big in all the mythology of mankind, where there's this battle between the forces of darkness,
Ahriman and Ahura Mazda,
and he takes that and reinterprets it in a modern format, and which is beautiful, you know. So there's that kind of Mars, you know, the really instinctive Mars talking to the really instinctive Moon, and there's this synergy. I think there's a synergy there that can work really well.
I guess we are all ruled by our desires, pretty much. Most people, you can't tell what their Mars energy is. That's probably easier to pick up than most, don't you think? Or Moon. Before Sun. Sun is probably
maybe
one of the
rising
last
sign
ones.
because it's showing, you know, and the planet that governs the rising.
Isn't the Sun the hardest to get to?
Yeah,
pretty much for people?
yeah. People always tell me, guess my sign.
Oh no, I
always say, why? I was like, maybe I could guess your rising sign.
I know, I can always
it's
tell
on your
them.
face. But I was like, you asking that question shows that you don't know anything about astrology and can't even have a discussion about it. So why don't you come for a reading and really learn your chart, and then I want to hear the questions that come out of you.
Because how many people don't even relate to their sun sign?
Yeah, I mean, you might have a sun in Aries and have 5 planets in Cancer squaring it, and in that Cancer archetype, you're the healer nurturer more than you're the warrior.
Exactly.
You got a little fire in there, but mostly you know.
I mean, nobody ever sees me as a Capricorn unless I'm working with them. Otherwise, I don't come across.
Well, in astrology, we think of the Moon in terms of instinctive, unconscious, emotional. That's who you are when you're at home and when you're really comfortable, right? Well,
hear that bird back there?
Yeah.
We got dogs barking. We got birds quacking.
Oh, it must be a Mars hour. I bet it is.
All the animals are going. Sometimes we live out in the country.
They were quiet until a minute ago.
I know.
If you think, I must have invoked the spirit of the animals, with the white squirrels gone
With
around.
your Mars and Taurus.
The white squirrels have gone around and united them all to speak with us. But you know, if you think about it in terms of evolutionary astrology, like Jeff Green and Stephen Forrest, and there's a lot of new energy in that direction. Ray Merriman was one of the pioneers, actually. He wrote one of the
handwritten pioneer.
early treatises on that subject. And there's a lot of, you know, tension in that area in the astrological community on whether we should speak about past lives, whether we have the right to, and I think it's up to the client.
About raising people up by not.
Well, you know, there's this real element of fear consciousness in the world right now, right? We talked earlier about the opposition being this aspect of tension that you can't really escape from, that you have to hold this tension of opposites within you at some level in order to integrate these. And what's been happening is, and we talked about the transits of midlife, you know, the Pluto square, the Neptune square, and then the Uranus opposition. And what's happening right now on a collective level is, at 9/11 we had Saturn opposite Pluto, so we had that opposition. So, and then after that we had Saturn opposite Neptune. And now we're coming into the Saturn opposite Uranus. So in the same order as a human being's midlife crisis, we're having the Saturn opposite transit.
We're having a cultural life
This is
crisis.
going to be
We're having
exciting.
a collective midlife crisis in a way, and there's all this fear consciousness.
There'll be a lot of motorcycle
we have
sales.
to be afraid of the Iranians, as if being afraid of the Russians and the nuclear holocaust.
That didn't help us much.
The Pluto and Leo generation, they're coming from that place. These people were all in grade school. They were all taught to hide under their desk in case the bomb went off and stuff. And
like a desk going to stop the nuke. You see the little skeleton under the desk? Just going into ashes,
And right now we have a Pluto and Leo leader in this country, if you want to call him that, who's really, trying to motivate everybody through fear. It's like, we have to be, look out for this.
That's why they're calling Barack Obama a new kind of politician, because he does have Pluto and Virgo. So he's defining his power by the need to serve, not Pluto in Leo. My power depends on me being the little king of the hill with all my little people around me serving me,
Yeah.
Let me guess that we all have Pluto and Virgo.
I have Pluto and Virgo. 2945. So I almost came out as Generation X.
But Pluto square.
The next generation is going to define their power by diplomacy and negotiation and art.
Right.
Yeah.
The Generation X, they're the ones that invented MTV. They want to take art and make it really seductive and dark and just really provocative art,
Yeah.
In the 80s and the 90s,
And Pluto and Scorpio just got provocative.
Yeah.
It's like everything's out there.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, wow.
It's is that 8 o'clock on TV?
Yeah, you have, like Janet Jackson revealing her breast in the Super Bowl. And,
Oops.
And yeah, right. That wasn't supposed
Hey,
to happen.
I didn't mean it to be
Really,
so
it was an
perfect.
accident.
Don't you know Mars governs sex and sports? Must have been a Mars moment.
Oh, desire.
But yeah,
Back to
there's
desire.
Back to
the whole.
desire.
Well, the word
Did
desire.
you finish that bag of chips, by the way, after we're
Yeah, I
done
ate the
here?
whole thing. But the word desire comes from Latin, means desidere, of the stars. So our true desire, not the desire that the Buddha talked about, all suffering is caused by desire. He was talking about the false desires of the uninitiated self, but when you have a true connection with your spiritual desire, it's like you have a connection with the stars. The word disaster means without the stars.
Right. To be without the cosmic guidance of the stars.
Exactly.
Is disastrous.
Yes, it is.
Because if you aren't watching the stars and aware of the omens, then disaster might befall you, right? That's why all astrologers, all kings had a court astrologer. They had all kingdoms, and if and all towers, right? All castles had an astrologer, because all castles had a king or a baron or a prince or whatever. And if you think about it in those terms, if the Twin Towers had an astrologer, some of the astrology behind that is really profound.
Yeah,
I mean,
Saturn and Gemini, the twins, Pluto, death, and from a Sagittarius, another culture, and religious expression.
Yeah, and on more technical levels, if you look at the ingress chart for New York City for that year, it had this really evil star rising, Algol, which is
I wonder if
Al
Al
with your
Gore has
head.
that.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
and so if
But in a good sense of showing us our shadow. I joked around. I said, I wonder if Al Gore has that. Al Gore.
Oh yeah.
But I meant it in a sense of him being the bearer of an inconvenient truth.
Well, there's a whole other thing about Ceres with that, right? Al Gore, his movie came out when Ceres was conjunct Neptune. So Mother Earth, the goddess of Mother Earth, meets the goddess of film. And here's the inconvenient truth being birthed as Ceres is being rediscovered and reclassified by the astronomers.
Perfect.
So it's really it's really perfect. But the point of all that is that if we can
The point is, we're having a commercial. We're writing a book on Ceres. And it's going to be the guide to understanding Ceres and your birth chart.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get beyond the level of fear and being motivated by fear,
It's anger. A lot of people fear-based is
if
anger.
you can start to realize that anxiety is there for a purpose, and the purpose is not to crawl in a shell and be defensive and prickly like a porcupine, or to lash out and hit them before they can hit you.
Like a tiger?
You know, neither response is entirely appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Right.
The point of anxiety, the point of these this collective midlife crisis is awareness. Is to heighten your awareness of what's going on, so that you can own your part in what's going on. You can own your part in the reawakening of the Ceres archetype. You can own your part in the reawakening of the Ceres on a global scale. First by owning it personally. First by, I like to say, as we wrestle with our own worldview, with the questions that Saturn Neptune brought up. Is the suspension of habeas corpus a real reason, a real justification for what happened at 9/11? As we wrestle with those questions personally, it's like Jacob wrestling with the angel, and thereby becoming Israel. As we wrestle with our personal angels, or demons as they may be, if we're in fear consciousness, then we collectively we facilitate the collective awareness, rising. And so,
isn't Mars right back where it was during 9/11 right now? Wasn't it right around the end of Gemini, beginning of Cancer, in the 9/11 turn?
I don't recall.
I remember it being over there. I know the moon was there.
Yeah.
Because the moon came off that Saturn, and the next day, boom.
I'd have to look.
Yeah, with the look.
I'd have to look.
It's interesting that retrograde, what you were saying, I always see retrograde as like swimming back up the stream to find the source of wisdom where all the water's flowing from, And I find that retrograde planets in a chart are kind of like the slow kid in school that has to take their time to come out of their shell. Once they come out of their shell, they're like, whoa!
Yeah.
I didn't know you were that kid in this corner.
Right. What happened?
Yeah.
Because they reached the direct station and then boom, they took off.
Totally.
And oftentimes, surpass even the ones that were sort of quote unquote normal. Yeah. That's a good way of looking at it.
What if it's the opposite and it goes retrograde?
Well, we were talking about progressions earlier, and then what I've found that planets that change direction by progression, that is a profound moment in that person's life.
I remember when I was 14, my teacher used to open up the ephemeris and have me look forward down the list and count the days to find when the gray area stopped, when the retrograde stopped. And she would tell me, like, see right there at that point, that planet's going to turn on for them in a big way.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And a lot of people born in 1960 during Mars in Cancer retrograde, they're all having it go direct now at 29 Gemini.
Whoa!
Right now, like as we speak, I know a few people
so
with
that's the
huge
people.
with Pluto.
Yeah. More 60s kids coming alive.
Yep.
Well, Uranus-Pluto square is going to bring it out. They're coming into their power. They're waxing squares saying, time to create a structure to contain the spiritual vision of our whole generation.
Yeah.
Boom!
Rebirth. I call that whole Uranus-Pluto square, which is the crisis in action of the conjunction, the 60s. I call that the maturation of the summer of love.
Summer of love.
Because
The maturation.
because I just so happen to be
with a hyphen. Maturation. You have like a mat to lay on.
okay.
It's not making grandchildren, is it?
Could be. Could be. That's gonna be really. I mean, like we were talking about earlier, the Saturn-Uranus oppositions.
Right.
That's another formation that was happening during the 60s.
And it's the opposite signs now.
Exactly.
It's interesting.
Yeah. It's the same
Exact
archetype. Right. Yeah. It's the same archetype that's being birthed, and you have people who really understand, that whole 9/11 thing and the fearful response that we had. It's like, man, that's not where it's at, man. That's not hip. That's not cool.
That's what Barack was talking about last night. He goes, we will not be governed by a politics of fear.
Right. I heard that was great.
Yeah. So people are really, that awareness of the oppositions now is really people are really starting to be able to hold that tension of the opposites. And that awareness is really going
well, even Barack is a manifestation of that, because we were all afraid of Osama, and he's named Obama, and we were all afraid of Hussein in Iraq.
Well, I had
and his middle name is Hussein.
I had a Republican tell me a really funny joke.
But look at it, Barack Obama is the blessed version of all that. Hussein, Osama.
Yeah.
So he's like the light to the dark, and people are trying to make him into the dark just because he's black. That ain't right.
This Republican told me this is
ain't right.
This is really a good way to wrap up. This Republican told me this joke the other day.
We're wrapping up.
He said the who was it? Oh, Chelsea Clinton.
Yeah.
Went around and interviewed all the troops to see how they felt about the election, you know, and he said her question to them was, what most concerns you about this country today? And they said, Osama, Obama, and yo mama.
Osama,
Yo
Obama,
mama.
and yo mama. That is funny.
Oh, that is good.
It's a good wrap up. Well, anyway, thanks for joining us on Astrology Illuminated. Hopefully .tv. Hopefully we'll get together every month and have some zany conversations
Zany.
with our fellow
That's for sure.
astral astrologers.
Around the fire, sharing stories
Yeah,
of the
I
stars.
mean, it might be snow out here in February, so we might be inside. But hey,
Hey,
we can never know. It's so unpredictable, the climate nowadays.
Kelly might have some pants on. If
Yeah, I'm have some pants on right now. They're in the wash, but you know, it happens. So,
See, did we help at all? We were always supposed to be helpful.
Yes.
We have to be of service.
it was great. Come
I
on.
know. Find your sun sign.
Yeah, find your ascendant and
Find
moon
your
sign.
Mars and harness it in service of the king, the will, the purpose of the life.
Right, purpose.
sun
Everyone
sign.
needs a purpose. I think that's when you fall into a rut, when you don't have a purpose. And that's
Yeah.
when you sit there and eat a whole bag of chips.
And want to
you'll
get
never
down, go down and cause some trouble in town, you know?
Right, no, you need a purpose.
Yeah.
Even if you're your own purpose.
Just don't go to Florida and buy a dolphin. That's a
That's a porpoise.
purpose.
My butt's cold.
Oh, Lord.
Your butt's cold? Yeah, this is a cold rock.
All
here.
of a sudden.
Wait.